Senator Ted Cruz weirdly has a podcast, and we never really understood why. And we thought maybe he's just trying to do more marketing for his runs, etc. And then it turns out that podcast gets money, and then it gets funneled to his PAC. Now, you guys are not going to be able to guess which foreign government has been funneling millions of dollars into that podcast. I know what you're thinking, probably Canada or Bolivia, but it turns out it might be a different one. Anna, tell us about it.
Well, Responsible Statecraft has been and is continuing to absolutely crush it in their reporting. And one of their latest reports is titled, "Israel is sponsoring ads on Ted Cruz's podcast. Is that legal?" Under an unusual deal with iHeartMedia, revenue from the show goes to a pro-Cruz super PAC. Now, just looking at that headline alone, I assumed, no, there's no way this is legal. Well, there have already been complaints to the FEC, and just wait till you hear the details on that. So the advertisements are apparently part of a $7 million I Am Israel campaign that was launched back in June. So it's geared toward encouraging Christians here in America to visit Israel and see biblical sites for themselves. And here's how the money makes its way to Ted Cruz's super PAC. So iHeartMedia, which has syndicated Ted Cruz's show, it's called Verdict with Ted Cruz, and they've done so since 2022. They cannot legally pay Senator Cruz directly for ad revenue. So what they've set up in this kind of unprecedented deal is ad revenue gets directed to a pro Ted Cruz PAC. Okay, so it's associated with the show's advertising sales to the Truth and Courage PAC, a super PAC dedicated to ensuring that Ted Cruz is reelected to the United States Senate. As Responsible Statecraft reports, the company has given at least $1,738,000 worth of digital revenue to the Truth and Courage PAC since 2023, and that's according to the Federal Election Commission filings. So some did file a complaint with the FEC, hoping that maybe something can be done about this, because obviously this is an effort to influence Ted Cruz even more than he's already influenced by Israeli money. The agency, though, the FEC, ruled in Ted Cruz's favor, finding that there was no available information to indicate that Cruz solicited, directed, received, transferred, or spent the funds iHeart paid to the PAC. So we're still pretending as though these super PACs act independent of the candidate, okay, which is a joke. Cruz's role was limited to hosting the podcast, and he does not appear to have been involved with the decision for iHeart to pay the PAC.
Nonsense.
Meaning that he did not direct or solicit any funds, the commission found.
What a load of garbage.
Now, luckily, to help walk us through this story and what transpired with the FEC is one of the people who's on the byline for this story, Connor Eccles, a reporter and the managing editor over at Responsible Statecraft. Connor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me on the show.
So let me just start off by asking you, are there any campaign finance laws anymore? Because this is obviously a way of funneling foreign money like directly to a senator.
Yeah, I mean, in practice, these laws are extremely weak, as you're pointing to, right? The experts that we talk to for this story who deal with campaign finance law are sort of shocked by the extent to which you can make some of these arrangements work. And in the case of the Truth and Courage PAC, the name of this PAC that is technically not Ted Cruz's, but that only spends in favor of Ted Cruz related causes. All the way back to 2020, they were technically the owners of Cruz's half of this podcast. And then they sort of sold those rights, or they passed along those rights to iHeartMedia so that they could then receive ad revenue. And so what we've seen in the past 4 years, like you said, there is about $2 million going from various companies and various organizations through iHeartMedia as an intermediary straight into a PAC that supports Ted Cruz. And the staffers of that PAC, believe it or not, are former staffers for Ted Cruz.
Oh my God, that is shocking. I would not have guessed that. Because I know it's totally independent of Ted Cruz, but only spends money to get Ted Cruz reelected. So it is so independent, it cannot help Ted Cruz at all. All right, so now, I just want this to be clear. Like, theoretically, anybody can do this, right? So if any foreign government can funnel millions of dollars to anybody's podcast. So, and this is what I want to run by you. So if we wanted, not that we have any connections to money in Qatar, unlike the fevered dreams of the Zionists here in America. But anyways, but let's say that we did. That we could go to Qatar and go, give me $1 billion. You know what? I'm gonna have podcasts that link to the PACs of every progressive running, and they're all gonna get $10 million, $20 million, et cetera. Hey, it's just ads for my podcast, and it just happens to be going to their PACs, and it's independent of them. Now every dollar goes to helping them get elected. Could we do that?
In theory, yes. The question that would go before the lawyers is, well, there's two questions. One would be, is this being done at a fair market rate? So in theory, your podcast has to be popular. It's hard to tell exactly how popular Ted Cruz's podcast is because we don't have those numbers, but we've seen some as high as 2 million downloads a month. The second thing is that you as a candidate can't, quote unquote, like direct that money to go towards the PAC because you have to be legally distinct as an entity from the PAC. That could mean that all of these other people around you understand your interests and will act in your interests. But if there's evidence that you directly ordered that money to go from A to B, then that's a problem. And the same is true of if the Israeli government explicitly tells iHeartMedia that they want that money earmarked for the PAC. That would also be a violation. But again, it's a black box, right? We are not going to be able to get easy access to any of that information anytime soon.
So we are to believe that Senator Ted Cruz had no say and that iHeartMedia decided independently, we're gonna send this money to a pro-Cruz super PAC. That's what we're supposed to believe. Okay.
And by the way, that if they were sending it to, let's say, Tallarico PAC instead, Ted Cruz would keep doing the show. Oh, right, or he might stop entirely unless it went to his PAC.
Well, and ironically, they're actually now using the Truth and Courage PAC to spend against Tallarico and in favor of Ken Paxton in Texas as we speak.
This is amazing. So I don't know if you have any insight into the FEC's investigation into this, if there was an investigation at all. You know, you have complaints filed with the FEC. FEC comes out and says nothing wrong. Ted Cruz is doing nothing wrong. Okay, did they actually carry out an investigation? And if you know anything about it, can you give us details?
That's a bit of a black box for me. All I've got access to is sort of those FEC documents that you shared some of the quotes from on the screen earlier. It's not clear to me that there was any sort of major investigation. There were clearly conversations with Cruz because he himself said that he attended at least one meeting with representatives of iHeartMedia as part of the acquisition process of the podcast. But what happened in that meeting, whether there are notes related to it or recording or anything like that, we just don't know.
Okay, so there's also a story about how Israel is funding Christian Zionist organizations. I'm gonna connect it back to Ted Cruz in a second, but tell us about that.
Right, yeah, so there's been a lot of things in this case. I think that what you're referencing it's something Angels, I believe is the name of the, yeah, right, let me find the exact, so it's, or Eagle's Wings rather. So they did indeed, and this is reporting from my colleague Nick Cleveland Stout, who shared the byline with me on this piece, but they did funnel about $250,000 to Eagle's Wings, which is a Christian Zionist organization in New York. And they've been giving a ton of money to a ton of different Christian Zionist organizations in order to encourage them to sort of bring evangelicals back into the Zionist fold, because you're actually seeing a really significant movement among young evangelicals away from Zionism. Something like only, I think, 24% of evangelicals under 35 prefer the Israelis to the Palestinians, or say that they sort of side more with the Israelis over the Palestinians. And that's a big crisis for Israel's lobby here in the US, because that is their strongest force in American politics.
So let me get this right. The Israeli lobby, #1 donor in the last election cycle and in this election cycle, funnels hundreds of millions of dollars to our politicians, and our mainstream media, unlike you guys doing actual news, our mainstream media says, no, those hundreds of millions of dollars don't affect our politicians because they're angels. And then they funnel money through their podcasts directly into their PACs, and that's not even the Israeli lobby, that's Israel itself, so that's a foreign government. And our media says, no, that also, millions of dollars to their podcast also doesn't affect the politicians. And then they funnel millions of dollars down that you got $250,000 to that one group of millions overall to Christian Zionist leaders and pastors. And then our media says, no, that also doesn't affect those pastors at all. But and by the way, the reason the media says that is it's largely owned by radical Zionists like Rupert Murdoch and Larry Ellison, et cetera. But they say the fact that they're radical Zionists does not affect their coverage at all. They're very objective. That's why on TV you see nothing but people giving the Palestinian point of view. Oh, right, that's never allowed on TV. So, but what I'm driving at here is, Connor, doesn't it look to the naked eye like there's a foreign government funneling millions of dollars to our politicians, our media, and even our religious leaders to purchase almost every leader we have and have them all say the same thing, which is that Israel is our greatest ally. We owe them all the money in the world. God says to give it to them. Politicians say to give it to them. Media says to give it to them. And so they put in millions of dollars and get back billions of dollars. If you count the wars, trillions of dollars. Am I seeing anything, or is that a fair description of the state of affairs right now?
Yeah, I think it's hard to argue that that is, at the very least, the goal of this money, right? It's hard to say exactly how any given person is swayed, right? Like, I don't think Ted Cruz needed to be told that he should care about Israel. I think that is a deeply held view of his, however we feel about it. But there is a ton of money going into this because they see that there is a real decrease in support for Israel among Americans today, and that is having an effect on our politicians.
So final question for me, and this is really, your answer is gonna be subjective, I wanna be clear about that, but do you think that these efforts are gonna work? Like, for instance, do you think that young evangelicals will somehow be convinced by their pastors that a supremacist ideology is compatible with their Christian beliefs?
Well, I can say that I certainly hope that they will think independently. There's a really complicated sort of relationship, obviously, between people and their pastors, but I do think that we're seeing this younger generation seeing these images coming out of Gaza, seeing these images coming out of Lebanon, seeing the destruction and waste that has come from the US-Israeli war in Iran. They understand that the US being in lockstep with Israeli interests is not beneficial to us at home. And so I really do think that it's going to be an uphill battle for them. But then again, there was a large backlash against Israel that began in the 80s after a lot of actions they did in Lebanon. They were able to turn that around over the ensuing decades and get to the point where this all sort of had to start over again. So who's to say? But my suspicion is that it will be very difficult to put this genie back in the bottle. Yeah,
I'll work very hard to keep that genie out.
So my last question is about the actual advertising campaign. So they get the benefit of buying Ted Cruz, but they've bought him in many different ways. It's just one of the ways. They've also bought 94% of Congress. But mainstream media would say, no, the millions of dollars didn't affect those politicians. But on top of that, they're also promoting Israeli tourism. Do we know if in the ads they say, this is where we murdered the Palestinian kids, this is where we murdered the Palestinian grandmothers, and this is where we murdered the Palestinian moms, and so come to Israel and we'll show you the concentration camp we've set up for the Palestinians in Gaza, which is only 30% of what Gaza used to be in. All the places we're gonna set up the condos on top of dead Palestinian children. Is that part of the campaign?
No, it's not, of course. They do hold that out. They do hold that out. But I mean, that's, you're pointing at a really important thing, which is that what these ads are trying to do is to speak to Christians as Christians. They're saying that it says, come to Israel and you will be changed. This is an experience that will allow you to have a different perspective on all of these biblical sites that you read about, that you hear about from your pastor. But the reality of it, and what Israeli officials said around the launch of this campaign, actually, let me see, the Israeli ambassador to the United States said, we've accomplished so much in the last 3 years. We have defeated our enemies. Now it's your turn. Now you have to start again, bring the groups to Israel. So what they're saying is if you bring these groups to Israel, they'll be able to start rehabilitating their image after these years of war and destruction.
Or they could try to rehabilitate their image by not slaughtering innocent people in multiple countries simultaneously, or dragging the United States into a disastrous war that's like creating havoc in the global economy. They could try that.
Right.
But I know that that's real challenging for the Israelis, especially when they're practicing a supremacist ideology.
Okay.
But anyway.
So we're wrapping up, but I just want to point out one thing that Connor just mentioned there. Connor, in that quote, he seems to be kind of confessing. He's saying, now remember, we bribed you through the podcast and we bribed the Christian organizations. So it's now your job to bring them to Israel so we can have more tourism dollars and so we could brainwash them with our propaganda into thinking that good Christians should be anti-life and should be for murdering kids. And so he almost seems to be directing them. He's saying, now that we've paid you, it's your job to help us do this propaganda. Am I mishearing that, or did he accidentally kind of say it out loud?
No, there's certainly some of that. I mean, he's pointing specifically to this money coming from the Israeli government itself to these different ad campaigns, but the goal is clearly that. The goal is that, by putting this money into American organizations, and it's not just iHeartMedia, you could see these ads on YouTube, on Hulu, on all kinds of different platforms, that they're trying to push for people to come and to see something different than what everyone has seen on their phones for the last 3 years.
Connor, what can I say? Keep doing what you're doing, keep crushing it, and we're happy to feature the work that you're doing because it's super important. And legacy media refuses to cover stories like this that are incredibly important and consequential to our lives here in the United States and the lives of innocent people in the Middle East, of course. So thank you again, and we look forward to hearing from your reporting in the future.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.